For years, she barely spoke. Not in the way celebrities speak now, with constant explanations and carefully managed self-portraits. She gave interviews when she had to, then went back to work, back to the part of fashion that runs on pictures, reputation, and silence. It was unusual even before social media made access feel like a right, and it held through everything: trend cycles, scandal, and cultural arguments that used her body as evidence. Kate Moss became one of fashion's most familiar faces without turning herself into a public narrator. That instinct shaped her career as much as any campaign did. It kept her guarded, it kept her elusive, and it helped her last long enough to become something rarer than a top model. She became an institution before the world understood what that cost. Kate Moss was born January 16, 1974, and grew up in Croydon in South London. She did not come from the fashion circuit. No industry parents, no early pipeline into elite schools or glossy connections. Croydon was ordinary enough that it rarely shows up in fashion origin stories, except as a marker of how far someone traveled. Her entry point into modeling has been repeated so often it reads like a legend. In 1988, at 14, she was spotted at JFK Airport in New York by Sarah Dukas, who ran Storm Model Management. Storm folded that moment into its identity, treating the discovery as a turning point for the agency as much as for her. The core fact remains: someone in power saw her first, and the story of her arrival was narrated from the start through the language of being chosen. Even early on, she learned the job depended on endurance as much as looks: waiting, being evaluated, and being told to move on without explanation. It trained her to read a room fast and keep her reactions private. She was about 5'7". That mattered. Late 1980s high fashion still leaned hard toward height and polish, toward women who looked built for distance. Models were expected to hold the space the way architecture does. Moss entered rooms that had been designed for a different kind of body and a different kind of glamour. Early on, that made her an outlier more than a novelty. Outlier status can sound romantic in hindsight, but in real time it is a negotiation. Shorter than runway norms, younger than almost everyone in the room, she was asked to adapt to an industry that rarely adapts to anyone. It is easy to imagine the freedom of being different. It is harder to hold the reality. You are still a teenager, and difference becomes your job description. The fashion world she walked into was also coming off a very specific kind of decade. The late 1980s sold wealth as a look. Hair was big, shoulders were sharp, faces were sculpted by makeup that aimed for impact rather than intimacy. The models who defined that moment looked polished and powerful. Moss arrived with a softer, less armored presence, and the first question inside that system was practical. Could she be made to fit the frame that already existed? The answer, at the start, was not a clean yes. So the frame began to move instead, for good. That shift did not happen all at once. For a while, she existed in the awkward space between curiosity and resistance, the kind of face people remembered even when they were unsure what to do with it. Fashion often changes slowly until one image makes the old standard look tired. She became one of those images. In July 1990, the face put 16-year-old Kate Moss on a cover and in an editorial that would be treated later as a cultural hinge. The photographs were shot by Corinne Day and styled by Melanie Ward, and the setting was Camber Sands. The visual language was stripped down: beach, friends, instinct, clothes that looked lived in rather than staged. It turned away from the expensive, armored gloss of late 1980s fashion imagery and moved the camera closer. That shoot didn't invent youth culture, but it matched the mood of a shifting Britain. The face was built for moments like that. It documented scenes rather than selling fantasy, and it treated style like a reflection of real life instead of a costume rented for an afternoon. The editorial made fashion feel like something you could touch. It also gave the industry a template it could replicate: intimacy as aesthetic. Once that template landed, it spread. Brands and magazines learned that the camera could sell vulnerability and that natural could be constructed as carefully as glamour. A new kind of cool formed around understatement, bare skin, unpolished hair, a sense of privacy that looked casually offered. Moss became a powerful vehicle for that because she didn't read as a performer. Even when she was performing, the performance looked like it wasn't there. Editors learned she photographed as both girl next door and icon instantly. The industry also loved how she made clothes look lived in, not displayed. Intimacy, though, has a price when the person at the center is 16. The power imbalance was baked in. Adults controlled the magazine, the camera, the edit, and the future uses of the images. Moss became famous through pictures that looked unguarded, and that meant she was expected to be unguarded in the room while they were made. Decades later, she described that early period with a mix of pride and discomfort. In 2022, speaking on Desert Island Discs, she talked about feeling pressured into topless work as a teenager and about being scared and vulnerable in shoots that the industry framed as iconic. She also described anxiety so intense she struggled to get out of bed for jobs. There is a reason she kept coming back to context. A photograph can be celebrated as art and still be made under conditions the subject didn't fully choose. A magazine can be praised for shifting culture and still be a place where a teenager is asked to take emotional risks she cannot yet measure. The Face editorial launched her into visibility, then it taught the industry what it could take from her look. Those two facts are inseparable. By the early 1990s, Moss had moved from editorial discovery to global advertising. Calvin Klein leaned into her look, pairing her with the brand's preference for minimalism and provocation. In 1992, she appeared in a Calvin Klein underwear campaign with Mark Wahlberg, images that became cultural fixtures and later drew criticism for how sexualized they felt. In 2022, Moss described that shoot as an experience where she felt objectified, scared, and exposed, which complicated the way the images had been sold as iconic. In 1993, her then-boyfriend, Mario Sorrenti, photographed her in the British Virgin Islands for imagery tied to Calvin Klein's obsession legacy, pictures that became some of the most replayed fashion photographs of the decade. The work carried a sense of private access. A girlfriend photographed by a boyfriend, the camera close, the styling minimal, the mood intimate. It fit the era's hunger for real, while still being a global advertisement. At the same time, the industry and the culture began fighting over what her image represented. The word that stuck was waif, and it traveled with a bigger accusation that fashion had started glamorizing sickness, addiction, and fragility as style. The look had many authors, photographers, editors, casting directors, brands, but the public needed one face to attach to the trend, and hers was the easiest to name. In May 1997, President Bill Clinton condemned heroin chic in remarks to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, warning that fashion imagery was making drug culture look glamorous and calling that message destructive. A sitting president placed an aesthetic argument on the record as a public health concern. Moss became the shorthand, whether she asked for it or not. She did not control the lighting, the styling, the publication choices, or the broader economy that rewarded thinness. But she was the symbol that stayed visible, so the consequence stayed attached to her. There is also a more personal layer to why the argument kept chasing her. Her face carried a specific kind of neutrality. She could look innocent and knowing in the same frame. She could look bored, then suddenly electric. Fashion could project whatever story it needed onto her, and the culture did the same thing. When the culture decided the story was dangerous, it still used her to illustrate the danger. In 2022, she pushed back against the role directly. She called herself a scapegoat for other people's problems, and she rejected the idea that the aesthetic of the era was a confession of her private health. It was one of the rare times she stepped into the argument instead of being used as its exhibit. She had lived through years of headlines and moral panic without narrating herself. By then, the outside story had hardened, and she'd been forced to move through a career where strangers' conclusions often traveled farther than her own words. The lesson was blunt. Fashion spreads. Credit across many hands, then concentrates blame on the most recognizable face when the culture turns. By the mid-1990s, she was a working symbol in more than one direction at once. Fashion treated her as a muse. Tabloids treated her as a character. Cameras followed her into clubs, restaurants, hotel lobbies, airports. She became famous at a moment when fame still had physical edges. You could disappear if you stayed home, but you could also be watched if you walked outside. Her relationship with actor Johnny Depp became one of the most photographed romances of the decade. They were together from 1994 to 1998, and the coverage turned them into a running tabloid plot. Club entrances, airport shots, blur of flashbulbs outside hotel doors. The visibility fed the myth that she lived inside chaos on purpose, because the public saw the noise and assumed it was the point. That attention didn't stay confined to romance coverage. It bled into how she was written about everywhere else. A model became a character, and the character was easier to sell than the work. The press could turn a grainy photo into a personality trait, and a night out into a thesis about who she was. For her, the practical effect was simple. The camera followed even when she wasn't on, and the line between professional image-making and private life collapsed fast. Once that happened, every new photo arrived already framed by the old story, and it took less and less to keep the narrative alive. In 2009, a short exchange in Women's Wear Daily reignited the entire body image argument with one line. Asked if she had a motto, Moss was quoted repeating the phrase, "Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels." The backlash came fast. Eating disorder advocates criticized it as dangerous language that echoed slogans already circulating in harmful online spaces. The line became sticky. It was repeated for years as evidence of an industry that treated self-denial as glamour. The phrase also outlived the original interview because it was short, brutal, and easy to repeat. Media loves language that can travel without explanation. What made that moment volatile was the weight already sitting on her name. She had been treated as the emblem of a certain ideal since her teens. Any comment about bodies was never going to land as a private thought. It would land as permission, as proof, as a headline. The quote also showed how little room she had to clarify once a sentence escaped into. The culture. The interview was not a memoir. It was not a long explanation. It was a trade press moment, small enough that it could be lifted whole and circulated without the rest of the conversation. The world did not wait for nuance. Whether she meant it as a joke, a recycled mantra, or a thoughtless repeat mattered less than the fact that it fit the story people already believed. That is the danger of being turned into a symbol early. Even your voice arrives already edited. In September 2005, the Daily Mirror published photographs taken at a London recording studio that appeared to show Kate Moss using a suspected illegal substance. She was there with musician Pete Doherty, who was already a tabloid fixture, and their combined fame turned the images into a global story. The fallout was fast and measurable. On September 20th, H&M announced it was canceling a planned advertising campaign with Moss, saying the situation did not align with its anti-drug stance and its work with the Mentor Foundation. The campaign was tied to a collection designed by Stella McCartney. Burberry canceled a forthcoming campaign in the same period, saying it had been mutually agreed it was inappropriate to proceed while still calling her professional. Chanel also chose not to renew her contract when it expired. The story moved from gossip to corporate risk overnight. On September 22nd, Moss issued a public statement. She took full responsibility for her actions, acknowledged personal issues she needed to address, and said she had begun taking necessary steps to resolve them. Soon after, she entered rehabilitation, stepping out of public view while brands and editors decided what they could still afford to stand beside. Then the legal system entered the timeline. Police investigated. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence. In June 2006, the Crown Prosecution Service announced she would not be charged because there was no realistic prospect of conviction without being able to prove what substance was present. That same month, she returned as the face of Burberry's Autumn-Winter 2006 to 2007 campaign. The Associated Press described Burberry bringing her back after having pulled posters and paused plans during the scandal. Around that period, Alexander McQueen took a runway bow in a T-shirt that read, "We love you, Kate," a small gesture that made the industry's loyalty visible. The scandal did real damage, but it also revealed something about her. Position in the fashion economy. Brands could drop her to protect themselves in public, then return once the heat cooled because the pictures still sold the product. Her value was never just about approval. It was about attention, and attention has its own logic. After the mid-2000s storm, her public life quieted again. The tabloid cycle moved on. What did not stop was the steady work. Covers, campaigns, brand partnerships, and a long stretch of staying employed in an industry that treats women as replaceable by design. A classic celebrity comeback relies on confession, a long interview, a public reckoning, a redemption arc delivered through media. Moss never built her recovery that way. She returned through repetition. Show up, shoot the work, leave. That approach made her harder to attack because she did not offer the kind of new material scandals feed on. It also helped that fashion, at its core, is less moral than aesthetic. Brands want attention and credibility. Moss provided both. Her survival proved her market value, and her market value protected her. That is how institutions are made in industries that cycle through phases quickly. You outlast the cycle. She also made strategic choices about where to place herself. She did not chase reality television reinvention. She did not write a memoir. She did not become a constant talk show presence. The more she limited access, the more the industry treated her like a stable object, something that belonged in its history and in its present at the same time. Her silence was not total. She did speak at key moments, but she treated speech like a resource, not a habit. When she returned to public conversation in 2022, the details were striking for what they revealed about the cost of the job, fear on sets, pressure in sexualized shoots, and an anxiety that could flatten her before work days. In the same year, she appeared in a courtroom by video link to correct a rumor about her relationship with Johnny Depp that had floated for decades. She did not use that visibility to expand her story. She used it to close one file, then step back again. The more important shift happened away from the flash. She began collecting roles that moved her closer to control. In 2007, she launched a fashion collaboration with Topshop that drew huge crowds at the London flagship and became a commercial event in its own right. The Guardian later reported the collection generated around £3 million in its first week in the UK. The point was not the exact number. The point was that she could sell product on name alone, outside the usual logic of being photographed as the product. By 2012, Forbes placed her near the top of its highest-paid models list, estimating her earnings at $9.2 million, proof that the market had not punished her for long. This was the part of her story tabloids rarely centered. She was not drifting through scandals. She was steadily building wealth inside an industry that usually retires women early. In 2013, the British Fashion Council gave her a Special Recognition Award, and British Vogue named her a contributing fashion editor. Her permanence showed up outside fashion too. At the London 2012 Olympics closing ceremony, the stadium briefly turned into a Union Jack runway while David Bowie's fashion played. Moss walked in a gold sequined Alexander McQueen gown alongside other British models in matching gold looks, a national broadcast of who the country still claimed as style royalty. By her late 30s and early 40s, she had become something the industry could place anywhere. Newer faces cycled through seasons and platforms, but she stayed useful without needing reinvention. She could be part of a stadium spectacle, then go straight back to campaigns and editorials, as if the spectacle was just another job on the calendar. Behind the scenes, she built a reputation for showing up and finishing. That consistency kept brands calling, long after trends shifted. The awards and titles didn't change her day-to-day work so much as her position in the room. The camera still followed her, but access shifted closer to the people who decide what gets photographed. A contributing editor credit and institutional recognition signaled the same turn. The industry wanted her as influence, not only as image. The clearest sign of that shift was structural. Kate Moss Agency Limited was incorporated as a private limited company on November 14, 2014. It became publicly known a little later, with press coverage framing it as her move into talent management. She built it before she announced it, and that sequence fits the way she's always worked. Running it meant contracts, mentoring, and shielding newcomers from traps. An agency is a different kind of power than a campaign. It is selection power. It is the ability to decide who gets a shot, who gets developed, who gets protected, and how much of their life becomes part of their market value. Moss had spent her teens being chosen. As an owner, she became someone who chooses. There is also a personal logic to the move. Her career taught her what the system can take. It taught her what happens when a teenager becomes a symbol and has to carry consequences meant for an entire industry. Owning an agency is a way of stepping out of the symbolic role and into something more solid. Infrastructure. Infrastructure survives scandals. Infrastructure lets you work without being the headline. In August 2022, Moss launched a wellness and beauty brand called Cosmos, framed around ritual, spirituality, and self-care. The pitch was a kind of reinvention: teas, skincare, fragrance, oils, and language built to suggest grounding and calm. British Vogue's launch coverage treated it as a personal statement, beyond a celebrity product line. The symbolism was obvious. For decades, she had been treated as the face of arguments about harm, thinness, excess, the idea that fashion imagery sold self-destruction. Cosmos tried to occupy the opposite identity: restoration, intention, a version of Moss that felt healed and serene. That kind of brand needs more than a famous founder. It needs the founder to be legible. Wellness marketing runs on confession, daily proof, and constant intimacy. Moss built her entire career on the opposite habit: distance. She has never been an influencer-style narrator. She rarely performs her interior life for the public. Cosmos has asked her, in effect, to do the thing she has avoided for most of her adult life. It also asked the public to accept a new storyline. A wellness brand sells alignment. The founder lives the promise. Moss's public image has always been fragmented: fashion icon, tabloid character, serious worker, party girl myth, quiet mother, editor, business owner. She does not carry one clean narrative, and she has never made it her job to hand one to strangers. Cosmos needed that clarity because the products themselves were not the only product. The idea of her as a guide was part of what consumers were buying. By June 2025, the company behind the brand entered voluntary liquidation. The Gazette published a notice stating Cosmos Group Limited passed a special resolution to wind up on June 18, 2025, and appointed joint liquidators. Business of Fashion reported the brand entered liquidation and described debts to creditors. Cosmos's still lasted under 3 years. Her agency, meanwhile, remained active. Companies. House lists Kate Moss Agency Limited as an active company. The infrastructure that required her to be a decision-maker survived. The venture that asked her to sell an inner narrative did not. Kate Moss's career does not resolve into a clean morale. It repeats a pattern. An industry elevates an image, a culture uses that image to argue about itself, and the consequences land hardest on the person whose face is easiest to print. In the 1990s, she became the shorthand for an aesthetic built by many hands. In 2005, she became the headline for a private life turned into corporate risk. In 2009, she became the lightning rod for a sentence that outlived any explanation. What kept her in the room was not confession or reinvention by interview. It was endurance and a refusal to let the public fully own her voice. She feared being taken out of context, so she limited the context people could take. That did not stop the world from projecting onto her, but it did stop the world from getting full access. The businesses that lasted are the ones that work without constant self-disclosure. Campaigns, editorial work, an agency that can operate behind the scenes. The experiment that failed was the one that depended on her being readable in a way she has never been comfortable offering. She learned early that the loudest version of you is not always the truest, and she refused to feed it when cameras wanted more. In an era built on oversharing, her most consistent form of control has been restraint, not as a gimmick, not as a pose, but as a boundary. It may be the only boundary she has held from the beginning.